Welcome to a new Next Level. I'm Tommy Ashley. That's Greg Barnes, always sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt and JohnnyT-Shirt.com. Greg, scrolling at the bottom says a new day in college athletics. And we've talked about this for a long time. And quite frankly, college athletics has changed before today. But what we're going to discuss is a big, big move, Greg. Just the House settlement finally approved. It has some prongs to it, but just a brief history of this for folks that haven't been paying attention, which I doubt there are too many people on Inside Carolina that have not paid attention and know what we're going to talk about. But for the people in the back, let them know what the House settlement means.
Oh, goodness. Where do we start, Tommy? Let's see. Way back in 1984, we can actually go back that far. The NCAA was told by the courts that they were in violation of antitrust because they were trying to hog media rights. I believe it was Oklahoma that took the NCAA to court. And the media world that we know now, where all the games are on, that dates back specifically to that 1984 case. Walter Byers, who was the longtime NCAA executive director, after that decision, told Sports Illustrated, I think it's time that we have a professional division in NCAA athletics to go alongside the amateur divisions. That was 41 years ago. Here we are. Byers was essentially pushed out in the years that followed. He was getting pretty old anyway. But his peers did not agree with him. And so what we have seen, and it's really ramped up since the O'Bannon case. What was that? 15 years ago? Mm-hmm. It's really ramped up. But kind of where we got to where we are right now is the NCAA got greedy. And what the NCAA did for a long, long time, and I wrote articles on this years ago during the NCAA investigation, is that anytime a student athlete would challenge the NCAA and have a way to win in court, what did the NCAA do? They essentially settled so that they folded so that they did not have to go to court. And this played out time and time and time again until we get to Austin. And what Austin was, it wasn't an NIL deal situation. It was about education expenses. And student athletes were wanting more opportunities and more items to use for their education. The NCAA did not want to do that. They were deeming them impermissible benefits. And so the NCAA chose to fight that one all the way up to the Supreme Court. And it was in that decision that Brett Kavanaugh kind of made the mention that, hey, other people can challenge you on the way that you handle things, right? This is antitrust situation where you're not doing things the way that you should be doing them. You're limiting student athletes in a way that you should not be doing it. And just that reference and his commentary opened the floodgates. So what we saw initially, of course, was just a couple months later, a lot of states started saying, all right, we're going to pass NIL legislation. Forget the NCAA. And so at the last minute in June of 2021, the NCAA said, oh, no, we've got to scramble together at the last minute. Let's put something together and get NIL going before these state laws go into effect. That was July 1, 2021. Because the NCAA waited so long to take it seriously, they had 3 rules for NIL. And we know what the Wild West that has been since, right? It's been 4 years of chaos. But alongside the NIL decision, we started having all these other lawsuits pop up about, wait a minute, now this is antitrust. What about over here? What about media rights? What about NIL as a whole? And so what the House settlement is, it's 3 of those class action lawsuits brought together. It's House versus NCAA. House was a swimmer from Arizona State. So I know a lot of people sometimes think it's your House of Representatives. It is not. He was a swimmer. But it's House versus NCAA, Hubbard versus NCAA, and Carter versus NCAA. And these 3 cases are very similar in their approach, so they were brought together. And it was a little bit over a year, maybe a year and a month, a year and 2 months ago, that the House settlement was essentially agreed upon. And it's like uh, 300,000 student athletes on one side and the NCAA and the power conferences on the other. But over the course of the last 13, 14 months, with class action lawsuits, there's a lot of processes. So you have a meeting in court, some things are decided upon, and then the judge opens the floor basically for people who are part of the class action lawsuit to object, to make comments. And then the judge looks at what those comments are, what those objections are, and makes changes. And that's really what's played out. We thought this had a chance to pass maybe last fall. It did not. It got kicked down the road. And then we thought April 7 was going to be the day. But Claudia Wilkin, who oversaw Austin, she's in charge of this one. At that point in time, because there's a lot of objections, she thought it was going to be better if they addressed some of the roster limit issues. And that's something that we can get into. But 2 months later, it finally is approved. The issues that she had were rectified by the attorneys. And here we are. And this covers a lot of areas, but I'm just going to say what the 4 key points are here, Tommy, and then we can break into it however you want to do so. But there's 4 primary components with the House settlement. Number 1 is retroactive damages, and it is $2.8 billion. Now, unfortunately for some of the old timers, this only goes back to 2016. So essentially from 2016 to 2024, 2.7 of that 2.8 billion goes to that group of people. And the way they've got it split out is, I think 75% going to football student athletes, 15% to men's basketball. I believe it's 5% to women's basketball, and then the other 5% to other sports. And that's back payment. And you may say, well, why did the NCAA agree to 2.8 billion? Well, they were looking at a $20 billion loss if they went to court and lost. So they basically said, you know what, we're going to take 10% of that, eat it, and move forward. The second part is the revenue share option that we've talked about a lot. And that's this money moving forward, where universities and institutions can directly share revenue with student athletes for the first time ever. NIL is not coming from the universities. NIL is supposed to be coming from commercial entities, businesses, and those types of things. Of course, with collectives and how that has worked in recent years, there's been a lot of wiggling and working around the edges so that boosters could just pay players. And part of the House settlements to kind of get away from that. The third part is just some revisions to the NIL bylaws. And then you've got roster sizes and scholarship limits, which that's an interesting component. Bubba Cunningham told me a couple of weeks ago he wasn't even sure how that got into the settlement. So that's a discussion that we can have. But those are the 4 main parts. There's the back payment, which is the $2.8 billion. There's a revenue share model that's in place now. There's some other changes to infrastructure. Of course, there's going to be the College Sports Commission, which is supposed to help oversee a lot of this. And then it's just a matter of trying to make sure all this stuff works together moving forward, because this starts on July 1. So we're into the second week of June now. So there's not many days left to make sure all this is finalized, although they have been working on it for, as we said, a little bit over a year.
Yes, incredible. You start this talking about 1984 and Oklahoma and all of that way back when. The wheels of justice move very slowly. We've seen, Greg, couple points I want you to make. Why 2016 on the back payment? Why, if I'm a 2015 athlete, I'm not getting a piece of the pie? And how much money are we talking about individual athletes? Are they splitting it up equally? For everybody that was on the 2016 rosters, or how does that really work? If you know, because I have a feeling that there's going to be a lot of athletes in that time frame getting like a $5 check and things like that. I can see that coming. But what's the nature of that, and what's the organization of that, of how they're going to do it for all this back pay?
I don't know the exact reason for the 2016. I assume it has something to do with statute of limitations, those types of things. I do not exactly know what that reason is. In terms of the, how it's split out, it's kind of the same idea moving forward. It's about revenue. It's lost revenue. And so, as we know, football is the predominant player. I mean, football brings in all the money, even more so than men's basketball. If you look at North Carolina, which is a basketball school, football brings in more than double in terms of revenue every year. And I know that's surprising to a lot of people, but that's just the way it is. And so that's how it's broken down. Is they're just trying to look at, okay, where's most of the revenue coming in from, and then how to split it up. And I think the interesting thing, and I think this is an important part for people to understand, is because so much has been focused on the 75, 15, 5, 5 breakdown of the back payment. A lot of people assume moving forward, that's how it's going to be for rev share. And that's not necessarily the case. Now, we know that some schools have said they're pretty much going to follow that model. I think the Texas Tech, I put in my column, Texas Tech athletic director said back in December, I think they're looking at 74% for football and then like 17, 18% for men's basketball, and then split out the rest from there. But people need to understand it is specific to what the athletic director and the chancellor president of the school wants it to be. And that's kind of the key component. So if you want to put, if Bubba Cunningham said, you know what, we've had another really good baseball year, we're going to invest all $20.5 million that we get from rev share moving forward in baseball, he could do that. Now, he won't do that, but you have that flexibility moving forward. It's not as defined as that back payment split out the way it is with revenue centered on, hey, these are the sports that make all the money, therefore those players are getting the money.
And real quickly, teams that or schools that do not have a football program can spend that money on other sports, right? Like, Georgetown or those schools like that with no football program, they can pour 90%, 80%, 75% of that into basketball, whereas the other schools, most likely, to your point, are going to use it on football.
Yeah, and let's talk about that a little bit, because I've seen that concern of like, whoa, this means that the Big East is going to be elite in basketball moving forward because they can spend all $20.5 million of rev share in 25, 26 on basketball. There may be unique situations where you have a billionaire, and I understand St. John's has a billionaire booster who's kind of gotten involved. $20 million in 1 year is a lot, even for a billionaire. I mean, it's crazy money. And I think I was looking at this the other day, but like UNC Wilmington, Wilmington brought in $18 million in revenue in 23, 24.
Across the department.
Across the entire athletic department. St. John's, which does not have a football program, brought in 40. North Carolina, largely because of its football program, brought in 4 times that, 160. UConn's a good example. UConn was trying to get out of the Big East because they were not making any money with the Big East media deal. I mean, I think the media deal is like $8 million a year contributions to its member institutions, and the ACC's 5 times that. So because so much of this money is increased on top of the already set budget, the idea that all these boosters are going to swoop in with these big paychecks and say, we're going to fund it for the entire year. It may happen. I'm sure there will be a story. I mean, Arkansas sounds like there's some of that going on there. Most of the money is going to have to be coming from other revenue streams, from tickets, from sponsorships. Bubba has said institutional support is going to play a role, which we've already talked about. So the money is coming from a lot of different areas. The St. John's thing, I was looking at it. They've had 23 boosters 2 years ago that contributed at least $50,000. $50,000 is a lot of money to donate, but it's not $20 million. And I think people need to understand. And that the other part of that is While full expectation that the SEC and the Big Ten schools will be full rev share, meaning they can pay the entire 20.5 million. And our understanding is that Carolina will do the same. I would venture that the large majority of Division I schools won't get anywhere close to that total, including a good portion of the ACC schools. And so Carolina is going to have a leg up on some of its ACC counterparts. But UNC also has more sports. So I think it's important for people to understand that just because like some of the Big East teams have the ability to put more money into basketball because they don't have a football team, the football team is what brings in a lot of money. So not having football is really an albatross around your neck when you're trying to get to that 20.5 rev share number.
Yeah, absolutely. Not as simple as folks make it out to be. Another thing, and this is one thing you talk about the expense put on universities. Not only you got that back pay, not only that, but you've got this increase in scholarships. And I think I want you to sort of discuss this aspect of it. I think that is a huge tax on the department. You go from 11.7 in baseball to 34 or whatever the final number is, Greg. That is very good for the baseball program, but that's expensive. And we talked about all these other sports. Just sort of speak to how the increased scholarship limits, if they're going to really, they're going to tax these schools financially in that aspect, just covering the cost of doing business and the cost of scholarships. Am I wrong there thinking that it's going to be very expensive for a lot of these schools to handle that aspect of this?
Yes. And so, again, there's so many parts of this that we can just kind of dive into. Let's say this, as I mentioned with the 20.5 in rev share, when you opt in, which pretty much every school that plays competitive sports opts in, you don't have to spend all of that 20.5. I've heard of teams that everybody knows of that may only spend 10 million or try to spend 10 million. So just like that, scholarship wise, you don't have to fund all the scholarships. And this is a very unique thing where North Carolina, I think, is ahead of the game. And the Rams Club has done just a fantastic job over the years of building their scholarship endowment. I'm not sure what it's up to now, but it's something, $550, $600 million in endowment for athletic aid. That is a significant number that they can draw from. And as we reported several months ago, what's going to happen with the scholarship situation, and I'll direct this to North Carolina specifically, is the NCAA is replacing scholarship limits with roster limits. This is going to go to court. Bubba told me a few weeks ago that he doesn't think this will probably be in place in 3 years because it's just not going to hold up. This is what Wilkin had issue with and why there was a delay over the last couple of months with kind of how the roster setup was. But because they're putting caps on rosters now and essentially saying you can give as many scholarships as you want now because we have rosters set. So football, for example, Nebraska, USA Today reported they had 180 players on their football roster, I guess last year or year before. 180, right?
Lord.
You could do 85 scholarships in football. And then they had another, 95 kids who weren't on scholarship. Carolina has never done that many. Carolina typically is like 120, 125. And if you followed our coverage over the years, one of the beefs that all of the coaches have had since I've been covering Carolina is that when you get to training camp, you can only have 105 in accordance with NCAA bylaws. And so there were kids on the team, walk-ons, who were not permitted to participate in training camp until class started. And then once class started, then those other 20 kids could come and join the team, but they'd missed, 2.5 weeks of training camp. And so that was somewhat of a problem. What is taking place now is that you can have 105 kids on the roster. And if you want to fund all 105 scholarships for the football team, you can. Interestingly enough, Ohio State has said they likely won't fund all 105 in the first year. I think Carolina probably will. And so when we look at Carolina's specific numbers, this past year they had approximately 850 student athletes on rosters. Well, moving forward, that number is going to move to 735. So you're talking about 115 roster spots that are going to be removed. And that was where Wilkin had an issue of saying, wait a minute, so we're basically pulling scholarships and we're cutting kids because of this settlement. That kind of goes against the whole idea of the settlement. We're supposed to be helping the kids, not hurting them. And so kids that have lost their scholarship, who have already been cut because that's already happened, or you had an offer pulled, they can be designated basically to be grandfathered in. And so for a couple years, you'll have these kids where the roster numbers won't exactly work out because you have more than what the total should be. But over the period of the next couple years, that'll get you back down to what it's supposed to be. But as I said, Carolina's going from 850 to 735. But what that means is that North Carolina right now, well, before July 1, so 24, 25, they were paying out the equivalent of 330 full scholarships. That breaks down into partial scholarships and full scholarships of 530 student athletes. So, roughly 2/3 of student athletes at North Carolina were getting some piece of the pie in terms of scholarship money. North Carolina, because of the scholarship endowment that the Rams Club has put together, we're told by sources that there is a big push to kind of make North Carolina a leader in this space. And the expectation is that North Carolina is going to increase scholarship allotment by like 50%, which is massive. Bubba said a couple weeks ago when we talked to him about this that probably North Carolina won't get to the spot of where they're funding all 735 scholarships fully. That's probably too far to reach, but they're going to get pretty close. And that's going to be a very unique thing. I mean, when Ohio State's saying they can't fund all 105 football, but Carolina potentially can, that's a big advantage. One other aspect of this, I don't know how much of a role it's going to play for North Carolina, but the settlement allows for any new scholarships that you add. You can count 2.5 million towards your rev share. So for some people, that's going to help. It's got to be new scholarship money. North Carolina, for example, is already paying 85 full scholarships for football. If they only do 85 moving forward, they can't direct any of those 85 to count for that 2.5. I don't know how big of an issue that's going to be anyway, but it's just something that's in the House settlement that some people will use. The scholarship limits and roster sizes are interesting. Just to give you a few of these, and I've got the list in front of me, Tommy. So if you have any specific questions, let me know. Baseball is the clear big one. In previous years, they've had 11.7 scholarships available. And what North Carolina and most schools do is you divvy those up as best you can to make sure some kids are able to get some assistance. Previous roster size was on average 41. New roster size will be 34. So I'm not exactly sure how many student athletes North Carolina's had on roster in recent years, but that's going to be a very strict 34. But again, everything I've been told is that there's going to be a big push to get North Carolina very close to that increased roster size in terms of scholarship. Golf had 4.5. New roster size is going to be 9. So you're doubling your scholarship potential allotment there. Lacrosse was 12.6. New roster size is 48. So in theory, you could quadruple the amount of scholarships that you had in lacrosse. And then football, of course, we've talked about it before with the JV team. But North Carolina, in previous years, you could have 13 scholarships. Well, now you can have 15 scholarships, but you can only have 15 people on the roster. And so anytime you have an assistant coach or a head coach coaching any of these teams, that kind of counts as a walk-on. And that's a big part of why the the JV team is not in position to kind of move forward. Does that make
Let
sense?
me that and I didn't mean to cut you off, but that aspect of it, certainly tears down some of the historical value of Carolina and the JV team, and that's a lot of people sad to see that go. But Greg, explain the cost of a scholarship to people, because I know how much I pay for in-state folks to go, and then I know how much out-of-state regular people pay to go for the very same education. Scholarship costs, especially for out-of-state people, are $50, $60, $70,000 at least per. Is that accurate from what you've looked at, or is that something that I know how they finagle the numbers to do that? But this increase in scholarship, the roster sizes are going to be cut, yes, but a lot of those, to your point, were walk-ons or non-scholarship or not full scholarship. But now they're going, if Carolina does it, will be full scholarships. The cost of one scholarship going from 11.7 to 34 in baseball. I mean, that's an astronomical number, is it not?
Yeah. So just looking back, let's see, I've got the 2023 in front of me. Where's 25 at? But your North Carolina reported 15 million in 23 in the cost of athletic aid. I think it was 16 in 23-24. And so, part of that is I don't know that finagling is the word necessarily, but being able to get a better price on the scholarships and getting more of these kids as at in-state tuition is a big part of this. Is helpful, but if we're looking at this number, but if it's 16 million and they're talking about maybe increasing it by 50%, another $8 to $10 million on top of what's already there. And then, when you're adding 20.5 million in rev share, you're talking an additional $30 million in cost on the athletic department, just like that. So yeah, it's a significant amount of money. And that's one of the things that, North Carolina has seen this coming, and we knew this was going to be here eventually. I mean, we've talked about it for over a year now, but North Carolina has kind of had their eye on this, and I've been working to kind of get here. And so when you see things like the Bill Belichick hire, where there's a massive commitment to the football program, and we've seen the same thing with the basketball program now, that's an understanding of a couple of things. One, okay, this is a lot about money now. We have to make sure we're spending appropriately so that we can maximize our brand. What that also means is we have to have that revenue coming in. And so you're seeing an increase of like, okay, there's an understanding. Carolina has to do a better job with scholarships, with sponsorships. They've got to do a better job with their business partnerships to raise funds for those sponsorships. The institutional support that Bubba has mentioned and that we've already talked about, in 23-24, there was $14 million in institutional support provided to the athletic department. 2 years prior, it was zero. That's a massive change. Lee Roberts is a big part of that as chancellor. He understands all these things. We've talked about the Dean Smith Center. How do you best maximize revenue for the basketball program? Well, you seriously consider a new arena off campus. So all these things kind of go into this of what are we doing to maximize revenue? Because now we have to spend a lot more money, not only boosting up our football and men's basketball programs with staffing and all these things, but also with rev share coming in, also with scholarship money. Although, as I said before, the Rams Club has done such a fantastic job in helping to support. That's a key component of the rev share. And I'm fascinated to see if Bubba will talk about a lot of this. But it would not surprise me with how things are kind of set up with the Rams Club, doing a better job of and doing everything they can to fund as much scholarship money as possible. For the scholarship money going to all the Olympic sports to really cover a lot of those needs that would be coming from NIL and rev share, so that the majority of the rev share, the large majority of the rev share, will go directly to football and men's basketball, instead of there being, okay, well, we're going to do like 12 million to football and 5 to men's basketball, and then the other, however many, 3-4 million will go to Olympic sports. If you do it properly with the scholarships covering a lot of those additional costs in the Olympic sports, which is where a lot of the NIL money goes to anyway, right? I mean, when we did the story on baseball last year and NIL contracts, because they only had 11.7 scholarships available, the NIL money and the contracts that were being signed really were just there to fund the rest of that tuition. And that's really what the Olympic sports athletes need anyway, is to cover the cost of admission. And then that way, if scholarships can do that, that opens the door for the rev sports in football and basketball taking the bulk of that rev share payout, of the 20.5 million.
Yeah, the baseline is to have these student athletes that come and do what they can for the university, not have to leave with debt.
Correct.
And that is something that was talked about a lot over the past few years. And this one thing you didn't mention, and one thing I was thinking about, and we could talk about this forever. And if folks haven't read Greg's column at the website on InsideCarolina.com, is unbelievable, the amount of information and getting it down to the regular folks can understand it. Conference affiliation, Greg, feels like that could be an issue, or makes that aspect of this important as well. With all this money we're talking about, we know what's going on with that. We've heard about that. We've talked about that. But your take on the importance of maybe those talks with all of this and all of this money talk here, is that a bigger thing as I feel like it is?
It is for sure. And, as we mentioned kind of to start with the NIL legislation, that was so haphazardly thrown together at the last minute that we had to deal with the fallout of that for years after. This is different because it's been talked about for 14 months now. And so a lot of the pieces were already in place. And as our buddy Everett Withers used to say, they were sitting on G waiting on O for a long time. And even Bubba, when I talked to him a couple weeks ago, he said, well, I don't know. We think it's going to pass. Everybody's ready, but you kind of have to just wait and see how it plays out. And so because of that, I mentioned that because a lot of these conversations about conference affiliation have been going on in the background. And I think there's that understanding of, even if the House doesn't get approved, something very similar to the House will be approved. And that's part of the conversation. And so as we've tried to lay out, Tommy, on the next level here and just on the Carolina IC message boards, when we talk about the need for more money, this is a big part of it, the rev share aspect of things. As we said, when you add the scholarship money and the rev share aspect of things, in addition to coaching salaries and the coaching staff upgrades and all these kind of things, I don't know what the number is, but I don't think 50 million additional a year is that far off base in terms of additional costs coming in. And you're doing that to make sure you're well positioned for the future. And if you can look and say, okay, well, if the ACC doesn't get its act together and doesn't do a better job generating revenue, and the ACC, give them credit, they've done a little bit better than I expected over the last year or two in terms of generating revenue for its member institutions. But if those benchmarks aren't met and the decision is ultimately made, hey, we've got to jump ship, we need to go and make sure that we can cover all these costs that we're incurring and go to the Big Ten or the SEC, that's all part of the conversation. And that's all part of this path moving forward. I do think getting the House approved was a big step forward, to your point. And it kind of clears a hurdle that needed to be cleared. And I think everybody knows that if you decide to leave a conference, like with the ACC, you got to do it like a year in advance. And so you got to make sure all your ducks are in a row. And that's the other part of this too, Tommy, is yes, the House settlement has passed. Yes, everybody is celebrating student athlete wise. We have some definition moving forward. There's going to be lawsuits like in July pushing back against the House settlement. It's going to happen. And then the other part of it, and I mentioned this in my column, is you've already got these other lawsuits waiting to happen. Fontenette, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, versus NCAA was filed 2 years ago. It literally has been sitting on the sideline because they wanted to wait and see what happened with the House. It goes beyond what the House does. It's not just about NIL rights. It's about all forms of compensation for student athletes. That's a biggie. It doesn't have as many student athletes involved, but it's got like 150. And that's a big court case likely coming down the pipe. Allen versus NCAA is another one that deals with the NCAA illegally restricting compensation. Hill versus NCAA is similar to House, but it's saying that the definition for NIL should include media rights in terms of back payment, which is media rights is a big deal that we've talked about a lot. So you got all these other pretty big lawsuits in place that we're waiting on House to wrap up to kind of redirect and to move forward. So none of this is clear at the moment, even though House has been approved. And I think that's a key part, is because it's not just everything's wrapped up and tied in a nice little bow. It's we've got more to come. How's that going to play out? And those are the things that the powers that be in Chapel Hill are having to weigh and saying, okay, well, we have this hurdle, we have this. What are we doing here? And they've done a really good job of it thus far. But those are the things that are in play as they're making these decisions about, okay, if we're going to leave, if we're going to go to the SEC or the Big Ten, when do we do it? When do we feel like things are just right for us to make that move?
Last question. We're talking with Greg Barnes on the next level about the House settlement. It's been a long process here at Inside Carolina covering this here on Next Level. But Greg, final question for me, and we'll get out of here on this episode. Does this actually level the playing field?
It's the question that everybody's asking, Tommy. And I think it helps. And it's not so much about the rev share aspect of things, because you are for sure going to have the haves and have-nots. If you're not a Power 5 or Power 4 now program with a football team, you're most likely not going to be able to reach that full 20.5. And as I mentioned earlier, there's going to be a lot of schools that have Power 5 football that maybe can't get to that 20.5. So automatically you have a little bit of that, but we already had that in place with media rights anyway. And as Bubba Cunningham has said time and time again over the years, you don't have to have the most money to have success. And Carolina is a great example of that. Carolina does not have near the revenue streams that Texas and Ohio State has. But look at the number of national championships that the University of North Carolina has won. It's impressive. And so that's important for people to understand. But where I really think this can help level the playing field is with the commercial NIL part of things. And so they've really worked hard to where, and kind of to break it down simply for people, the way the new NIL structure is going to work is NIL Go. And I think it launches on June 11th. But it's a third-party clearinghouse. Deloitte's going to run it. They use LBI Software, which is a tech company that works a lot with professional sports and with celebrities, trying to do like market value for what does the left tackle typically make, right? For a Power 5 school, what is the starting left tackle valued at? We're not going to know that. We're not going to have the data for that for a number of years, but that's kind of where they're wanting to get to. They have all this information available. What does this particular player, what is his value? And then if he's an elite guy, that value is going to go up. If he's just kind of average, it may go down a little bit. That's where they're working toward. But the importance of the NIL Go setup is that you get away from some of these collectives basically just being funded by boosters and being workarounds to pay student athletes. That's happened a lot in recent years. The first year of NIL, you really did have like, hey, well, look, this is a car dealership. We're going to hire the quarterback for $250,000, and he's going to stand out in our lot and do a commercial. That was how it was intended to be. Armando Bacot, for example, had all kinds of deals, and he was like the poster child of this is how NIL should work and how you can make a lot of money. And it got away from that very quickly, and you basically just had back alley payouts like we saw back in the 80s with SMU and Golden Trans Ams and those kind of things. So the NIL Go and this third party entity is supposed to stem a lot of that. So any deal that you have that's worth more than $600, I have no idea how they got to that number, has to go through this clearinghouse. And Deloitte has this process in place where they verify the business, they verify the contract, they make sure it's legitimate, and they decide, hey, this is something that we're going to approve or something that we're not. So from that standpoint, in theory, that's going to help level the playing field. Now, are there still going to be people who cheat and who work around? Of course. I mean, that always happens. The problem is, who determines market value? Tommy, if somebody comes to you and says, Tommy, I think you're a fantastic podcast host. I want you to come. I came into some money. I want you to come do a podcast for me. I'm going to pay you $1.2 million because I think you're worth it. Who's to tell that person, no, you can't do that?
Not me.
In a free market system, you cannot do that. And so that's going to be challenged from day one. I mean, those lawsuits are going to come flying in as soon as Deloitte says, yeah, well, we don't think this kid's worth $300,000. We think he's worth $250,000. Yeah. Anybody thinking they can determine a market value for what a business is willing to pay somebody, to me, is laughable. But in theory, that's where it's supposed to help level the playing field. That doesn't mean that's perfect. It's not perfect. It's a lot better than what it's been. But again, there's going to be we're going to spend a lot of time covering court cases. Let me just say that.
There will be some people getting rich, and they will have JDs behind their names.
Correct.
And there will be a run on McDonald's paper bags as well here in the coming thing. And who knew SMU was on the cutting edge 40 years ago?
Yeah.
Before they got the death penalty, and now they're back.
Well, they heard about the 1984 decision of like, look, come on, NCAA, you got to start spreading the money some. So it's just going.
If you need a written form of this podcast, go to InsideCarolina.com. Check out Greg's column, and certainly the follow-up comments on the message boards is worth the price of admission there. It is something, and to your point, Greg, we'll be talking about this forever. There will never be a time where there's not a lawsuit pending that will have some impact on all of this. But in the meantime, you can stay tuned.
Yes. Hang on. Let me say this as we get out of here. Last thing. So what do we do about it? How do we fix the problem?
And who's we?
Just everybody who cares about intercollegiate athletics.
There you go.
Everybody watching this show and the powers that be and decision makers and all that. Bubba's talked about this. I agree with him. You got to get to collective bargaining. Now, there's some hurdles in place there. Typically, that's an employee type thing where employees are able to unionize, which is what a CBA basically is, and you negotiate with the schools and you set standards. And when you do that and you come to that agreement, the antitrust issues go away, which is what all the professional leagues do. Student athletes still are not employees. They're still, these are 1099 forms that they're going to be getting with their rev share stuff. And if the NCAA and the Power 5 conferences can figure out a way to get to collective bargaining without labeling student athletes as employees, that's what they're going to try to do. But that's what's going to happen. If you're wanting to set limits and caps and all of these things, then there's got to be a CBA in place. I don't see any other way to make it work. Otherwise, as we've talked about, you're going to be in court all day, every day for the years to come.
At least they still play the games between the lines, and folks can go check out the sports and at least get a little pleasure of watching the actual games. Greg, it's always a pleasure to talk about this stuff. I feel like we haven't been doing it for 40 years, but it feels like we've been doing it for a long time, and it just keeps evolving. It never stops changing, and that's one thing about the landscape. The title of the show, A New Day in College Athletics. Well, tomorrow might be a different day and down the road. But one thing's for certain, Greg Barnes will always be on it, writing for Inside Carolina, covering this stuff, doing the deep dive so we can all understand it in layman's terms, I guess you can speak. Greg, before I get out of here and tell you bye, I got to talk about Johnny T-Shirt, johnnyt-shirt.com, because they pay the bills too. And they provide you with a great opportunity to get all your Carolina swag online or in person at Johnny T-Shirt. Go check them out. Get 10% off your order if you're a premium subscriber. Greg, ETA on the next time we're talking about rev share, conference alignment, legal settlements, over under on our next show for that.
I think we will certainly be doing one early July, just because July 1's when all this kicks off officially, when rev share can actually begin. And I don't think it'll be much longer after that before we start seeing some interesting news about challenges and those kind of things. So, yeah, it won't be long after the country's birthday.
Officially official. We'll see you sometime in July talking about changes to what we just talked about. It's always a pleasure, though. That's Greg Barnes. I'm Tommy Ashley. Like I said, sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt. This has been The Next Level. Check us out on Inside Carolina on the YouTube channel and anywhere you get your podcast. Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, Tommy.